Previously on World History and Geography.
Europe experienced nearly a century of general peace, but with the start of World War I in 1914, that streak of peace was over. The Central Powers, made up of Germany, Austria, Hungary, and Bulgaria and the Ottoman Empire, were at war with the Allies, made up of France, Britain, and others. Russia, on the side of the Allies, had pulled out of the conflict early, around the same time the United States joined the Allies. The addition of the Americans proved a tipping point, and on November 11, 1918, the armistice was signed. The killing had stopped. The terms of peace, however, still had to be worked out.
And now, our feature presentation.
Now, the topic for your research paper will be World War I.
Sorry, we're not going to be doing a research paper. Anyway, on January 18, 1919, a conference to establish the terms of peace began at the Palace of Versailles outside Paris. Attending the talks known as the Paris Peace Conference were delegates representing 32 countries. Over 6 months, this conference would be the scene of vigorous, often bitter debate. The Allied powers struggled to solve their conflicting aims in various peace treaties. Despite representatives from numerous countries, the meeting's major decisions were hammered out by a group known as the Big Four: Woodrow Wilson of the United States, Georges Clemenceau of France, David Lloyd George of Great Britain, and Vittorio Orlando of Italy. Russia, in the grip of a civil war, was not represented since they pulled out of the war early with the Treaty of Brest-Litovsk. Neither Germany nor its allies were represented in the decision-making. In January 1918, while the war was still raging, President Wilson had drawn up a series of peace proposals. Known as the 14 Points, they outlined a plan for achieving a just and lasting peace. The first 4 points included an end to secret treaties, freedom of the seas, free trade, and reduced national armies and navies. The fifth goal was the adjustment of colonial claims with fairness toward colonial peoples. The 6th through 13th points were specific suggestions for changing borders and creating new nations. The guiding idea behind these points was self-determination. This meant allowing people to decide for themselves under what government they wished to live. Finally, the 14th point proposed a general association of nations that would protect great and small states alike. This reflected Wilson's hope for an organization that could peacefully negotiate solutions to world conflicts. As the Paris Peace Conference opened, Britain and France showed little sign of agreeing to Wilson's vision of peace. Both nations were concerned with national security. They also wanted to strip Germany of its war-making power. The differences in French, British, and U.S. aims led to heated arguments among the nation's leaders. Finally, a compromise was reached. The Treaty of Versailles between Germany and the Allied powers was signed on June 28, 1919, 5 years to the day after Franz Ferdinand's assassination in Sarajevo. Adopting Wilson's 14th point, the treaty created a League of Nations. The League was to be an international association whose goal would be to keep peace among nations. The treaty also punished Germany. The defeated nation lost substantial territory and had severe restrictions placed on its military operations. As tough as those provisions were, the harshest was Article 231. It was also known as the War Guilt Clause. It placed sole responsibility for the war on Germany's shoulders. As a result, Germany had to pay reparations to the Allies. Reparations means Germany had to compensate the Allies for all the stuff they'd broken. All of Germany's territories in Africa and the Pacific were declared mandates, or territories to be administered by the League of Nations. Under the peace agreement, the Allies would govern the mandates until they were judged ready for independence. The Versailles Treaty was just one of 5 treaties negotiated by the Allies. In the end, these agreements created feelings of bitterness and betrayal among the victors and the defeated. The Western powers signed separate peace treaties in 1919 and 1920 with each of the other defeated nations: Austria-Hungary, Bulgaria, and the Ottoman Empire. These treaties, too, led to huge land losses for the Central Powers. Several new countries were created out of the Austro-Hungarian Empire. Austria, Hungary, Czechoslovakia, and Yugoslavia were all recognized as independent nations. The Ottoman Turks were forced to give up almost all of their former empire. They retained only the territory that is today the country of Turkey. The Allies carved up the lands that the Ottomans lost in Southwest Asia into mandates, rather than independent nations. Palestine, Iraq, and Transjordan came under British control. Syria and Lebanon went to France. Russia, which had left the war early, suffered land losses as well. Romania and Poland both gained Russian territory. Finland, Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania, formerly part of Russia, became independent nations. In the end, the Treaty of Versailles did little to build a lasting peace. For one thing, the United States, considered after the war to be the dominant nation in the world, ultimately rejected the treaty. Many Americans objected to the settlement, and especially to President Wilson's League of Nations. Americans believed that the United States' best hope for peace was to stay out of European affairs. The United States worked out a separate treaty with Germany and its allies several years later. In addition, the treaty with Germany, in particular the War Guilt Clause, left a legacy of bitterness and hatred in the hearts of the German people. Other countries felt cheated and betrayed by the peace settlements as well. Throughout Africa and Asia, people in the mandated territories were angry at the way the Allies disregarded their desire for independence. The European powers, it seemed to them, merely talked about the principle of national self-determination. European colonialism, disguised as the mandate system, continued in Asia and Africa. Some Allied powers, too, were embittered by the outcome. Both Japan and Italy, which had entered the war to gain territory, had gained less than they wanted. Lacking the support of the United States and later other world powers, the League of Nations was in no position to take action on these and other complaints. The settlements at Versailles represented, as one observer noted, a peace built on quicksand. Indeed, that quicksand eventually would give way. In little more than 2 decades, the treaty's legacy of bitterness would help plunge the world into another catastrophic war.
Now, the topic for your research paper will be World War I.